When you think of an airplane, you probably imagine two wings, a long fuselage, and a familiar shape. But throughout aviation history, engineers have built aircraft that looked so strange they almost seemed impossible to fly. Some resembled flying pancakes, others had only one side of the fuselage, and a few looked more like science fiction than real airplanes. Surprisingly, many of these bizarre designs actually worked. So today, let's explore 10 of the weirdest airplanes ever built and discover why engineers created them in the first place. Vought V-173, the flying pancake. At first glance, the Vought V-173 doesn't even look like an airplane. Nicknamed the flying pancake, its almost perfectly circular wing made it resemble a giant flying disc. Built during World War II, the aircraft was designed to take off and land in extremely short distances while remaining highly maneuverable at low speeds. Two large propellers mounted on the front helped generate enough airflow over the wings to keep it stable. Although the design performed surprisingly well during test flights, it wasn't fast enough for military use. The project was eventually canceled, but it proved that unconventional wing shapes could actually fly. 2. NASA AD-1 oblique wing. Most airplanes have wings that remain perfectly straight, but the NASA AD-1 looked completely different. Its entire wing could rotate diagonally during flight, creating what engineers called an oblique wing. At higher speeds, this unusual design reduced aerodynamic drag while improving fuel efficiency. During testing in the late 1970s, the aircraft successfully demonstrated the concept, but pilots discovered it became increasingly difficult to control as the wing rotated further. Although the idea worked in theory, the handling problems prevented it from being used in commercial aviation. Even today, the AD-1 remains one of NASA's strangest experimental aircraft. 3. Blohm Voss BV-141. Almost every airplane is symmetrical, but the German Blohm Voss BV-141 completely ignored that rule. Instead of placing the cockpit in the center, engineers mounted it inside a large glass cabin on the right side of the aircraft, while the engine remained on the left. The unusual layout provided excellent visibility for reconnaissance missions during World War II. Surprisingly, despite its unbalanced appearance, the aircraft flew extremely well because its weight was carefully distributed. However, engine shortages and changing military priorities prevented large-scale production, making the BV-141 one of the most unusual aircraft ever built. 4. Caproni Ca.60 Noviplano. Imagine stacking 3 sets of wings on top of each other to create a giant passenger airplane. That was exactly the idea behind Italy's Caproni Ca.60 Noviplano. Built in 1921, it featured an incredible 9 wings arranged in 3 rows and was intended to carry around 100 passengers across the Atlantic Ocean. At the time, it was one of the most ambitious aviation projects ever attempted. Unfortunately, during its second test flight, the enormous aircraft became unstable shortly after takeoff and crashed into a lake. The prototype was heavily damaged, and the project was abandoned forever. 5. NASA M2F1, the flying bathtub. The NASA M2F1 earned one of aviation's funniest nicknames, the flying bathtub. Instead of using traditional wings, this experimental aircraft relied on a lifting body design, where the fuselage itself generated enough lift to stay airborne. Built mainly from light wood, it was initially towed behind a car before later being launched by an aircraft for testing. Engineers wanted to study how future spacecraft could safely glide back to Earth without wings. The experiments proved highly successful and directly influenced the design of the space shuttle decades later. Stipa-Caproni. If you've ever looked at a giant flying barrel, you're already close to what the Stipa-Caproni looked like. Built in Italy in 1932, this unusual aircraft featured a hollow tube running through the middle of the fuselage, with the propeller mounted inside it. Engineer Luigi Stipa believed this tube and propeller design would increase thrust while reducing fuel consumption. Surprisingly, the aircraft flew successfully during several test flights and proved the concept actually worked. However, it wasn't any faster than conventional airplanes and was far more complicated to build. Although the project ended quickly, many aviation historians believed its design inspired the development of the modern jet engine decades later. 7. Edgeley Optica. At first glance, the Edgeley Optica looks less like an airplane and more like a helicopter crossed with a giant dragonfly. Instead of a pointed nose, it featured a large bubble-shaped cockpit that gave pilots nearly 270 degrees of visibility. Behind the cabin, a ducted fan pushed the aircraft through the air while keeping noise levels extremely low. It was designed for aerial photography, police surveillance, wildlife observation, and search and rescue missions where visibility mattered more than speed. Despite its excellent performance, a factory fire and financial problems ended production. Today, only a handful of Opticas remain flying, making it one of the rarest and strangest civilian aircraft ever built. 8. Dornier D-31. Vertical takeoff is usually associated with helicopters, but in the 1960s, Germany attempted to build a passenger-style jet that could do exactly that. The Dornier D-31 combined traditional jet engines with 8 vertical lift engines mounted inside large pods under its wings. During takeoff, all 10 engines worked together, allowing the aircraft to rise straight into the air before transitioning into normal forward flight. It became the world's first and only jet transport capable of true vertical takeoff. However, the design was extremely expensive, heavy, and mechanically complex. Once military funding ended, the project was canceled despite its successful test flights. 9. McDonnell XF-85 Goblin. The McDonnell XF-85 Goblin may be the smallest fighter jet ever built. Measuring just over 14 feet long, it was designed to fit inside the bomb bay of a massive B-36 bomber. The idea was simple. Instead of escorting bombers with separate fighter aircraft, the Goblin would be released during combat to defend the bomber against enemy attacks before docking back inside the aircraft in midair. While the concept sounded brilliant, actually reconnecting with the bomber proved incredibly difficult due to turbulence. After several dangerous test flights, the U.S. Air Force abandoned the project, proving that some ideas work better on paper than in reality. 10. Airbus Beluga XL. Unlike the other aircraft on this list, the Airbus Beluga XL wasn't built as an experiment. It actually serves an important purpose today. With its enormous rounded fuselage, the Beluga XL looks more like a giant smiling whale than an airplane. But that unusual shape allows it to carry massive aircraft components that are far too large for ordinary cargo planes. Wings, fuselage sections, and other oversized parts are transported between Airbus factories across Europe. Despite its comical appearance, the Beluga XL is one of the most practical aircraft ever built, proving that sometimes the strangest-looking airplanes are also among the most useful. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which of these bizarre airplanes surprised you the most. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.